So Mark, over to you first. You want to just briefly, 1 minute, just talking about your background?
Yeah, hello everybody. Pleasure to be here. So my name is Mark Anheider. I'm a professor of intelligent robotics and interactive systems at the University of Lincoln. I lead the Center for Autonomous Systems there, which is all sorts of robotics, and robotics these days is a lot concerned about AI as well. So I teach in computer science, and we certainly have quite a challenge and an opportunity from the likes of ChatGPT these days, and I'm keen to discuss that a bit further. I'm currently on my sabbatical in Bonn in Germany. So I'm originally from Germany and I've kind of gone home for 2 months.
Nice.
Mairead.
That's great. I am not home. I'm from Ireland originally, but I'm sitting here in Manchester. So I'm based at the University of Manchester. I am chair in digital education and also associate director for e-learning and teaching innovation. It's a really long title in the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures at the University of Manchester. I've just been here since last year. So before that, basically for the last 20 years, I've been working in higher ed and ed tech, both sides, pretty much back and forth. Couldn't decide, so ended up doing both for most of my career. So digital education is my specialty.
Okay, so as I said, please raise any questions. Let's get the discussion going. We want this to be a two-way conversation. But I'll ask the first question just to get started. There's been a lot of conversations around what AI will do to the, how it will change the world. But just from your own personal reflections, that's a question I would like to start with, and you could go around in any order you feel comfortable. But what are you most looking forward to now being able to stop doing, because we'll have an AI chatbot or an AI system that can do it for us?
Shall I begin?
Yeah.
I think what I find most exciting when I look at these opportunities is that I can get people and students in particular to focus more on asking the right questions than desperately looking for answers. And because we need to recognize at the moment, at least in computer science, a lot is right now putting stuff into Google or the likes and just finding the right sort of code fragment and plugging them together. And very often, I think they are not really reflecting what it does. So just kind of copy pasting it over and just submit it. And I think what it allows us to use, AI tools is going back to what actually research is often about, is asking the right questions. Because once you ask the right questions, you're on the right track to actually then hopefully solving the real world, like the real problem. So I think that's cool that we can get probably people to, it changes a lot how we teach, but it is much more focused, I think, on being inquisitive and allowing people to focus on questions. Because the answers are relatively easy to get, but it's at least I think what the real challenge is often to ask questions.
Yes, a nice reference for Hitchhiker's Guide there too.
Yeah.
So Thomas, Mairead, who wants to go next?
I can go next if you like. I'm really glad you said that, Mark, because it's nice to hear that from computer science as well. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm the outnumbered one here today. But I suppose what I'm looking forward to most is, first of all, not having to convince everybody that digital matters, believe it or not. We still have to do that sometimes after the pandemic. But really, I think we're going through a bit of a painful kind of birthing process right now. But really what I think this is going to lead to is much more of a focus on learning as process rather than learning as output. And I think that is both the existential crisis that higher ed is looking at right now and also the opportunity at the same time. And I'm sure Mark and Thomas are well acquainted with what happened with Stack Overflow, when GPT first just came out. And I think that was the moment for everyone, computer science and other disciplines, where everybody said, okay, we're all going to have to deal with this together. How are we going to look at learning as it goes? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, most people have heard my views because I gave the keynote earlier on with this, but I guess what I'm most looking forward to is not having to do any marking anymore, because that can go to ChatGPT. I jest, of course, because I'm not willing to rely on that just yet, but I am willing to rely on it for much more formative feedback to help students to shape their work along the way, the time period when we don't necessarily have so much availability to look at everything, where a student wants feedback a couple of days before the official deadline. Yes, Tom, I wish, but no, marking is there is a certain art to marking, but I don't think ChatGPT is necessarily there to take work away from us. I think it is there perhaps to change the way we work and the way we help students interact with technology. There are still big questions to be asked for things like computer programming. How far can students just take code fragments from ChatGPT and embed them into their answers? I don't think it will give you an answer straight away without an additional work at the moment. So there are still some underlying skills that people need. The same question, as Mary Read said, about well, Stack Overflow, although it was expressed in a slightly different way, that we didn't want students to just go and take code fragments from Stack Overflow. Many did, and perhaps that's done in the real world. We have to be able to certify that students have a basic understanding of programming before they go and get their answers from somewhere else. So I think it's going to change what we do. I don't necessarily see the fundamental skills disappearing.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? I think your Stack Overflow is our essay, because I'm in the humanities, and we're all having our own crises of how are we going to measure students' learning. And clearly, as I said, like, it can't just be on output, it has to be on process. And for me, I should have added at the beginning, I suppose what I'm looking forward to the most, the opposite of what I'm going to stop doing, is I'm looking forward to incorporating what we already know works from literally 20+ years of digital learning design, digital pedagogies, active learning, all of the stuff that we've been talking about for the last probably 4 or 5 years in terms of Education 4.0. Where are we? What should we be doing? Collaborative learning, authentic assessment, all of that. I think the pandemic pushed us a little bit to it, and then we backed off, unfortunately, in many places. We said we were going to integrate it, but truthfully, in a lot of situations, we didn't. We should have, but we didn't quite as fully as maybe we could have. And I think now we have no choice. Now we're really being pushed by generative AI to look at those modes and those ways of teaching and learning that we've been kind of invited to for many years. So hopefully it's an opportunity. Yeah.
Okay, so I think just picking up on a question Tracy's got, and I think that's one of the key questions we need to answer with AI technologies like this, is the ethics behind it, particularly for the self-learning using the web as their source of information. How much can we trust that the AIs will be ethical that we're using, and how can we test that they are going to be ethical for us, given that they're commercial commodities and often locked away in terms of how they work? Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to say I don't think we can.
Yeah.
Just as simple as that. It's exactly that what is part of our educational mission here, right? To make this very clear. And I think there is a bit of a concern even now with let's compare it to what we've done before, which was using Google, right? And then you've got like tons of links. And what I was always impressed by, just looking at my much younger brother, and my mum really despaired about that he didn't read a book from front to from front to end. But he had a very good skill very quickly of filtering out what he deemed relevant, and this sort of very quick diagonal reading of what, oh yeah, this is relevant, I'll look at this with a bit more detail, and this I just discard right away. With things like ChatGPT, we are basically much more provided with, this is the truth, this is the answer, right? We ask a question and we get a single answer. You can inquire a bit more, but I think that's where the problem comes from. It is much more taken for gospel. I mean, we also have the problem, whatever you search in the web, you will find it in some way or another, but it needed people to really decide this is something that I deem relevant, and they had to filter and reflect on the different pieces of information they were given. I think there's a bit of concern about the new linearity, let's say, that comes with these sort of tools, where you have just the one answer, and if you don't really get people to reflect on this and try to rephrase it or question it, or actually you could use them, right? You can go back and say, oh, well, show me alternative opinions or something like that. But there's a massive risk here, I think, that people just fall for the first thing that comes up, which will not be necessarily reflective enough or even the truth.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting change in the way people may use it.
And also, I mean, one of the key skills, we've been talking for years about digital literacy, it's AI literacy now,
Yeah.
So in fact, to go back to, sorry, was it Emma's question? There's kind of two parts to it, I think. So first of all, one of the obvious things we need to be doing as teachers is we need to be having conversations with students. and we need to be bringing AI into the classroom. You know, one really great example of how this is being done right now is Ethan Mullick, a professor at Wharton in Pennsylvania, who's publishing everything he's doing on Twitter and on Substack. You can follow him. He's doing great stuff, and he's actually made using AI a prerequisite in his classes, and he's asking students to use it. And the whole point is to interrogate it and get used to it and have those conversations. So the first thing I would say is bring it in, talk about it, learn how to use it together, and look at things like those issues that Mark referred to, really, the issues of hallucination, of alignment, which is basically that GPT doesn't tell the truth. So we cannot assume that it's telling us the truth. We have to assume it's not, and then figure out if it is. It's a great critical tool in that sense. The other thing I just want to mention, though, is that from my perspective, this is really a call to educators. I came across an article just a few weeks ago written in 2020 by Tony Bates, who's a leader in digital online blended learning. And he had tried to publish a special issue on AI and its potential to transform higher education 3 years ago. And he issued a call for papers, and he got almost no responses. And the reason he got no responses, he said, was because educators were not engaging with AI.
Hopefully we can be over and done with quickly.
We got someone in the background, I think.
Yeah, SVC, animation interviews.
Hello.
So Mike, you, me, Diana.
I saw Diana's coming, yeah.
And Rod.
Okay.
It's the classic, you're not on mute, isn't it? You are on mute.
I'm muted. I'm muted.
Oh, there you go. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I think bigger picture wise, that's actually really important. I think it's brilliant that educators are engaged now. We're all jumping in. People are worrying. People are engaging in a way they weren't 3 years ago, and we needed to be. Now we are. And we should be part of what happens, and we should be part of the development conversation. We should be engaging with ed tech. We should be testing the tools. We should be weighing in on what we want, and we should be educating ourselves, because I'm not a computer scientist, whereas my colleagues here are. But I figure it's my business to learn as much about this as possible. And I think that goes for everyone across all disciplines right now.
Yeah, one of the questions that's coming up in the chat is around privacy and how much we can potentially protect our own privacy, given the harvesting and the potential sharing that's going on around that. I mean, any thoughts? Should we be concerned? Or is there anything we could be doing around that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I can come in, and Tracy, thanks for your question as well, and Emma for raising all those points. I mean, I think it's difficult because we're saying that you will get one consistent response out of ChatGPT, but of course you won't, because you can have 30 people in a class type in exactly the same prompt at the same time, and they will get 30 different responses. Some of them might be very correct, some of them might be partially correct, some of them might be completely wrong, because that's all to do with the random nature of how this works. And someone using ChatGPT 2 weeks from now with the same prompt may get a different response again, because the underlying model has changed. And so, like any AI system, there is a huge amount of bias in the system. It is only going to be as good as the underlying data set. And so if that data set is flawed in some way, if it's trained on bad data, if you believe it's bad, you'll get answers that you may not be too happy with for that. And so the ethical concerns, remember, there is a whole group of people employed in Kenya who are working through to improve this system, potentially with their own biases, looking at the type of prompts that are coming in, trying to remove any backdoors, so any way to get the chatbot to post racist content, whatever it might be, trying to remove all of those things, very lowly paid, depending on your view about local economies and how much people should be paid for being a job. And the whole system is built upon this. Now, in terms of the privacy aspect behind the ethics, then any data you're providing to ChatGPT is being used to improve their future offer. So you are there, the data, and that's why it was made available for free for so long. And I think the cost was, in the millions a day to provide this as a free service for people. That is just to improve the quality of the output, improve the model, reduce the operating costs, and to push people towards the paid for model, because we're at the situation now where the free model is incredibly limited. You might take a couple of minutes to get an answer back. You get shorter answers and more limited answers than you used to get. So you have to pay your $20. And so every educator is saying, well, my students must use this. Are they paying the students the $20 from their budget to make sure they do this? Or are we forcing students to spend money they won't have to complete an assignment that in the UK system may be completely invalid because this assignment was not designed in before the start of the academic year? And our quality processes don't just allow you to make arbitrary decisions in the middle of a year about how you teach and how you assess for very good reasons, because we're bound by the quality code here. So there are all kinds of challenges for quick changes that we need to think about, and all kind of ethical questions. But it's important we have these discussions in our universities and with students locally, because most people just will not have considered this, and I quite understand it. I barely consider many of these issues in the spur of the moment, even as a computer scientist, because if you think about every consideration, you would never use any of these tools.
Yeah. And you know what, I mean, weeks ago when I've been reading about this since November 30th and a bit before, but truthfully, like really full on, of course, like most people since November 30th who are not computer scientists. And, you know, what I've really learned too, what you mentioned, Thomas, about the training, of course, there's the issues with the initial data set, and we all know that. And, you know, as anyone who's not a white male, mostly from North America, will probably experience that, you know, the output is based on, you know, data that comes from, you know, a certain region more than others. It is definitely biased, as the original data set is biased. You know, I played around with silly things like putting in things in minority languages to see how it would do, and translations. And of course, it didn't work, understandably, and predictably. But, you know, in terms of training, what's in our hands, yes, to, of course, the privacy concerns. We know that. OpenAI opened it up to everybody because we are the data, as you said, Thomas. But the other side of it is that there are other ways of training the data, or training GPT and other forms of you know, other LLMs to get what you want. And the other two are the prompts. You know, Thomas, I think, mentioned prompt engineering a few minutes ago. That's become probably the most Googled term now, I think. You know, anyone who didn't know what prompt engineering a month ago was probably knows now. And it's literally the science of putting in the prompt to get what you want out of the LLM. And that in itself is an art and a skill, and that you can change and practice and play with. So prompt engineering is also a way to train to get the output you want. And the third is, as Thomas said, it's us using it, you know, giving the feedback to the not just OpenAI, but to the other, and there are many LLMs. This is just the one that's been in all the news right now. But can I just add one thing about the future too? We're talking about right now. What I'm seeing in the corporate world indicates to me pretty clearly where we're going with the education world. Because 2 months ago, we were, you know, all wringing our hands and saying, oh, what's going to happen with GPT? And we all saw what happened. Jasper AI took off even faster. All of the other ones added on, you know, layers to their foundation model, marketed as a product, and they're taking off. You know, everyone is buying them. Everybody loves them. And we're starting to see the same thing happen in education. You know, I'm seeing a few new startups launching where, again, same idea. They're using the base model. They're adding some kind of a customized template, and they're creating a product that educators will want to use. I went to a demo just 2 days ago on one for teachers, really marketed to K-12 teachers. That promises to, you know, take the work off of you, put in what you want, and we'll create a course design based on this template or that template. It all looks really attractive, but I think my kind of warning with all that is, just like we see with other technology products, if you make it too easy and you take away the moments where you have to think and learn how to prompt, then do you fall prey to not thinking about it the way we are right now? Like, I think the space we're in right now is actually a really good one, because we're being forced to think about it. Maybe 6 months down the road, we all have access to these great tools. I hope that we're thinking about it just as critically as we are right now, because it'll be easier to use, I think.
Yeah. Just reflecting really, one of the questions around the data source that it has, and the fact that, you know, past experience has demonstrated that, you know, for many sectors that there has been a bias with the interpretation in terms of what the outcomes are, so particularly as you highlighted, towards a particular ethnic group and sex. So should we then, with this, embrace this and try and retrain it at its early stages, and encourage wider use to get hold of that, to address that? Or should we be cautious of its ethics and its at this stage, and stay away from it until or limit our use of it until it manages to catch up? You know, what would you think?
I mean, isn't it similar to us also putting out our content, and we like on websites, right? We've done this many, many years that we actually, when we say like, oh, this is an interesting topic, or actually I want to provide a different perspective to it, or I want to, you know, present a certain topic that I'm teaching in a different way. I put this out there, right? I've been doing this in our robotics domain quite a while now, and I was super chuffed, for instance, when it got picked up by Yale University, right? They have taken some of my material and done it in their course. And so I think if we want to overall improve the material, if I want to, you know, make a contribution overall, I think we ought to do it open, right? I think we're keeping it too much to ourselves in general, and I don't see much of a difference here in that context, that these models will get better if we give them more information, and it's up to us to actually fight those biases to some extent, right? And how can we fight them? The tool is not going to go away. We can fight them only, I think, by actually training them to do better. So it sounds a very kind of believing view, but I think that's what we do. In the end, it's great that these AIs are improving and they're not necessarily completely stuck in the past of where we had this sort of mess of database. We need to do it, but we can't have it going into the self-fulfilling prophecy. Just one last comment on this, because one of my really admired colleagues, Manuela Veloso, who's a roboticist, said at a conference panel discussion once, we mustn't stop thinking. And that was in response to the advent of like machine learning in robotics, where people actually all of a sudden solved problems for which were really clever, optimal solutions available, but they solved them again with machine learning in a non-optimal way. And that was, for me, also kind of an enlightening moment where she said, like, well, we mustn't stop thinking, because we're actually just believing this technology and not, you know, looking anymore for the right and optimal solutions. And this is probably the same here, right? We need to keep thinking. How we get people to do this under the constant time pressures, and of course, this will, you know, when I look at workloading, etc., people will all come around eventually and say, like, well, actually, you can use this for marking. The university is going to invest in it. There's this new tool available. It will ease your marking, aka we can go and give you some more workload. So I think that's the problem, right? Having the space to keep thinking and reflecting is the real challenge.
That's really interesting, and I'm sure you both have noticed that with GPT-4, OpenAI is not being as open as it was before. So already with the switch from GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, that openness, that awareness, that wanting to talk to everybody, not so much. They're not sharing as much as they were. That's an ominous sign, I think. But I'm not one of these people who says, beware, don't use it. I'm saying jump in and use it. But I am aware of the discussion, and I think it is important to be aware of people like Gary Marcus. You know, he's been warning about this kind of stuff for years. He's saying, you know, neural networks, the LLMs we have now, they're not going down the right path. We're getting bigger, we're not getting better. And I think that is something to be thinking about. Bigger does not mean better. We need it to be smarter, not bigger. So I'm not saying we can arrest the development and change course, because the amount of big data we have now, this is the road we're on. But I do think it is really for educators to jump in and get involved. And I think that comment you made about workload is spot on. And I'm already seeing the marketing that says things like, take the onus off teachers, ease your workload by automatically generating X, Y, Z. And I mean, that's brilliant if you do that. But what I want to see with that extra time is, to go back to my point at the very beginning about Education 4.0 and learning design, I want to see high value learning activities designed into courses. I want to see people use that extra time to spend their time face to face, talking to students, talking about problems, being critical, being creative, being collaborative, not taking on extra tasks that they didn't have time for before they could automatically generate feedback. You know, I think that's the shift I'd love to see. I don't want the shift to be what you've just suggested, Mark. I agree completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you ever been in a situation where you've had a colleague who's been ill and you've been thrown in to deliver their lecture using their slides? It is one of the most difficult things to ever teach. And that's what we're suggesting if we go away and we ask AI to generate a set of slides for us of materials, because they're not ours. They may not pick up on the same points we know about and are interested in. It's always very hard to work with that style of material. So unless we can direct the system very carefully, then yes, there are advantages. Yes, maybe we can make the slides look a lot neater than they would have been. We can improve the quality, the accessibility of the slides, or the quality of the pictures to go with it using AI. But to completely replace us is incredibly difficult unless we're all superhuman with a knowledge well beyond the knowledge you often have to deliver one of many modules that monopolize our working week. I mean, I do give talks in other areas about this, business talks and things like that. And one thing I'll often say is that how we work with AI is about the human intelligence, not the artificial intelligence, the bits we can do on top to make best use of this technology.
Yeah, and that's what Education 4.0 is all about. It's basically, for anyone who's not familiar with this, it's this idea that we are now in the era of human-computer integration, right? And we need to manage the computer part. We need to learn how to use it, but we also have to bring the human, right? That's the whole point, is to bring the human to this equation so that we are not being ruled by the bots. So we have time to do the creative, collaborative work. So we have time to be critical and question things. And also, as you said, Thomas, I mean, there's been a lot now going on in the humanities where I'm based, talking about, you know, what does this mean for learning? What does this mean for knowledge? What is knowledge anymore? And for anyone, again, with like a background in learning science or who's interested in how people learn, we know that knowledge is constructed. We know that when you write an essay and you go through draft forms, it's the drafting that's where you learn, where you move things around. Anyone who's put a presentation together knows this. You know, it's the drafting that's the learning. So I agree completely. We don't want that output. That's why I think assessment, that's a huge topic everywhere in higher ed net right now. But that's why assessment as output as assessment of learning is so problematic now, because if we can just churn it out and we don't have a way to look at how it was created over time, then how do we know that the student has learned? And that's why I want those high value activities in the classroom. That's what I would like to see happening with that time that's freed up with efficiencies in other areas.
Okay, so one of the things that and that's come up in the chat, and one of the things I want to talk about is the impact of AI on higher education. And one of the views was that, you know, as has often been said in, you know, back in the days of e-learning, that it will allow, you know, greater student numbers and be able to reach more students. So one of the things Anne wrote was automated feedback means higher student-teacher ratios, and you know that, you know, we can discuss the pros and cons around that. But what do you think AI will do to the development and growth of universities over the coming years, and what skill sets do you think staff will need to be able to deal with that and make best use of it? Big questions, I know, but it'd be interesting just to have a think about.
I can go if you want. I feel like I just went, but I'll go if you don't mind. I'm kind of conscious. I think I'm talking a lot, but maybe that's just, I don't know. Okay, so this is a huge question and a great question. And I was delighted, you know, I'm delighted you're asking it. And I suppose my first reaction is when we ask about the growth and the development of universities, I found myself kind of thinking, first of all, what does that mean? Growth, development, in what ways? Are we talking about student numbers? Are we talking about, you know, growth as in like self-growth? So for me, growth means digital transformation right now. That is where higher ed needs to go. That is the growth that needs to be happening, and it is happening, but it's rather painful for many of us, I think we'll agree. So I think, again, if AI is forcing us to update in this regard, then that's great. We need to be updating. We need to be adapting our teaching and learning practices along with that. We have to be looking at how we innovate in our teaching and learning, how we deal with our students. As Thomas mentioned, you know, the computer-human integration, this is a hugely important theme, I think. So for me, the growth and development of universities, that's about getting through this stage and coming out as still an intact knowledge giving, sharing, creating industry, really, which is what we are, you know. The other side of it is the skills needed. They're all the ones we've kind of talked about, you know. Digital, for me, I'm a digital education background person, so clearly I'm biased, but digital design, you know, learning design, I think is absolutely fundamental. I think anyone who hasn't learned that already and isn't implementing some of those strategies and approaches is going to have to start looking at it, because otherwise the bots will do it for you. And you need to be putting your brain into that process of design. AI literacy is another huge one for students and for staff, to be creative, to be critical, to talk about the ethics, to talk about things like alignment, hallucination, biases, all of these things we've mentioned. But for me, what I really want to add again is those human skills. Like you don't hear a lot of people talking about this in the context of AI, but there's a lot of talk outside of AI. And before GPT came on the scene, there was a lot of talk about employability skills, future skills. And future skills are human skills. Future skills are what we used to call soft skills or power skills. They are the skills, they are the ability to sit around a table together and have a conversation and collaborate and work together. So if you have that, you know, I think you really need to be working on that as well as the balance, as the kind of balance to the computer bot side. And the lovely side, the kind of full circle, is that if you start to implement active learning methodologies, you know, these digital collaborative approaches, you actually manage to do that, because these future skills, these human skills, are skills that are developed and fostered by adapting those approaches to teaching and learning. So it's all very self-reinforcing, but I do think we need to kind of step back and go, okay, we need to take the time now to invest in doing that if we're going to move forward productively. Sorry, that was very long-winded, but that's my full thought.
Thomas, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, we're the computer scientists, so we don't always jump in first into conversations. That's the more introverted side of things. But I mean, it's all right, Mary. It's always good to have you starting things off, because you have so many. You have all the facts at your fingertips, and I sometimes struggle to remember everyone's names to relate some of these theories to. But I mean, it is the AI literacy, which I probably would have expressed in a slightly different way, but it's the fact that most staff don't really understand what AI is. And it's that message that AI is not magic. It can be a black box, and that's why we need to really push for explainable AI, so we can see why a computer system or an AI system has made a certain decision. But essentially, it's maths and stats making a decision at the end of the day about data that it has. And because I think most people don't really understand that, and they just look at this magical process, then therefore they never know how to work with this technology in the right way and how far they can trust it. And this extends far beyond just traditional written work. Think of all the assessment types that students can use AI for. Think about all the uses we can have it. Think about how it extends into the creative disciplines for people like me who aren't naturally creative but can use it for idea generation out there as well. So it is sort of having these conversations, and also working out who is going to have these conversations with staff at our institutions, because where are the people who are there ready and waiting to do this training and have the slack in their own schedules? And it's freeing up that time for the important conversations. And perhaps we can't make massive changes now. Many of us are coming towards the end of our academic year, but what is going to be in place for students in September 2023 to make sure they have the best future-proofed experience and they have the employability skills they're needed at the end of their student journey?
Mark.
Let me add some things how I did respond to, you know, since November last year, where I've actually changed one of the assessments in my course, because I've said, well, you know, I've fed my exam that I had, all my kind of open book exam through it, and it came back like at least I had to give it a 2-1, and that was after me having it improved and made it Google proof. So I gave up on that very quickly. But it's basically what it allows us now to do is to focus much more on the interactivity and the direct. I think, Marie, you said this, right? The sort of human part of it. So I basically went back to what I know from my German university times to do oral exams. So I'm having a conversation with the students instead. Of course, that means, you know, they don't have direct access to this tool, but it's in general, it's much more about having conversations now, and that's where our role comes in much more. Even to the point that, you know, you sit together and try out these tools, or you actually have, you know, embed them, as I've done this in one lecture here very quickly, where I've actually opened it up and I said, like, well, good question, let's see what it says, and then we reflected a little bit on that. So this interactive part comes back, and I think that's a huge opportunity for, let's say, these sort of face-to-face universities, let's say, again, because at the moment in many classes, what am I doing? Well, I'm basically delivering something that somebody else has already delivered, probably better on YouTube.
Yeah.
And the only value really comes in the last sort of 10 minutes when I try to engage with them in the discussion. So we need to move away from that. That's very clear. And talking about digital literacy, well, it seems people were, you know, we all learned how to use PowerPoint eventually. Probably we didn't know, or many people didn't know. Maybe that's not the tool for the future then, right? Maybe this is now where we move more towards using these AI tools. And that's where we need to, you know, get people to this. It becomes a tool like any other computer tool in some ways. And we gotten used to use those. So I have some high hopes that in not only in computer science, but also other disciplines, it will become and evolve into useful tools.
And we're on
but I think that
Microsoft.
the key part is
Sorry.
the interactivity, really.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And
yes, I shut up.
we're on Microsoft Teams, aren't we, Mark? Like
Yeah.
here we are on Microsoft Teams, so we're all going to have Copilot. Like
Yeah.
what you're saying, you know, and Thomas, you know, you can create, you can put in something saying, I want a video with this, I want myself to look like this in a video and add this text, and it'll, you know, it's going to help you do it. And as I said, I think that's probably coming to more ed tech soon, not yet, but I suspect it will be more customizable soon. But yeah, I think that's but I think honestly it's workload, and it's looking at, as you said, Thomas, who is going to do the work to have this ready for students when they come back in the autumn? Because I'm also getting a lot of, you know, we'll look at it soon, but not quite today. I literally just saw an article on Higher Ed, American Higher Ed Journal this morning, and there was a quote, basically that exact thing verbatim, you know, we'll look at it, but it's spring break right now. Okay. Yeah.
Well, just to pose a question, can we afford to wait? What do you think? Marie, anything else? You know, so
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, my view is someone who I think that the kinds of, I suppose I say no so vehemently because I feel like the things we need to do to address this, we should have already been doing. We have been doing, but we need to do more across the board. It shouldn't be an outlier. It shouldn't be a pilot. It shouldn't be a, you know, a test experiment. We should be investing. For example, I think in higher ed across the board, we need to be investing much more in learning design, in teams. We need to have that expertise in-house for academic staff to call on so that they can sit down, have a conversation with someone. And learning technologists too, but most universities in the UK don't have huge learning design teams. That is going to be a critical skill set, I think, in the next little while, if we're going to be, you know, really purposefully designing our teaching and learning for good outcomes.
Mark, you going to jump in there? Or?
So, no, I was trying to reflect on the sort of, you know, what does it mean? Like we have big teams now that are advising us and all the educators on digital technology. Maybe yes, for a transition period that's needed, but of course it needs to be in the end. We all need to, whatever subject they are, right? As I said before, they have all gotten used to use some sort of computer tools. And so they need this time. Maybe that's because the development is so fast paced that there is a need to say like, well, we're going to take them by the hand. But in the end, it becomes part of the expectation of being an educator that you are familiar with that. And maybe, I don't know how much actually, you know, teaching the teacher is relevant here, but I think that's probably where we need to start.
And I think we need to do something that people have been doing for 15 years. It's not a new approach. We need to flip the classrooms, like radically flip the classroom. We did it years ago, then we backed away from it again. Why not flip the classroom completely? And as you said, like that's what I mean when I say use your classroom time for high value activities. Anything that you think a student could be spending on time, you know, doing on AI or with GPT or whatever, that can be something that they're doing at home or in a campus lab or whatever. But make sure that if you have that 1 hour twice a week or 3 times a week, spend that time actually interrogating, you know, the content, have a look at it, have discussions. And that way you will know if students are actually constructing knowledge from it and with you in groups and individually. So that's a short term, but I think actually a fairly doable solution.
Okay, so Thomas, just want to pick up a question of you. We've talked around the impact of AI, and Ned raised in the chat the challenges around developing skill sets, particular skill sets, particular technologies that may not survive. ChatGPT may disappear. It may well be the Ask Jeeves of the search engines, for all we know. So, with that in mind, what skill sets do we need to be developing in our staff and in our students and integrating within in our curriculum that's going to enable us to take advantage of this future that's coming, whether we like it or not?
Yeah, and I guess if I was teaching computer science, I would say we're teaching the concepts. We're not there teaching a particular programming language, because programming languages come and go, but the underlying logical brain you need, an understanding of how to work with the programming language will stay. And it's exactly the same with technologies. It's why we're not there focusing a hope on tools. We're focusing on what students can do with the technologies, how they can evaluate how good a particular large language model is there, how they can find out its strengths and weaknesses. And as everyone else has said, it is all about thinking about learning design. It is all thinking about how we assess, and these are changes we should have made already. So many of the innovations surrounding good teaching are ones that should already be in place. I have slides I sometimes use about what kind of assessments are less likely to see AI misuse, and they're nearly the same ones about as a slide I would have had about what kind of assessments are less likely to have contract cheating take place on them, i.e. the student paying someone else to do their work for them, because these areas have not changed, but because they've not been addressed widely, this is becoming more and more of a problem. But I do sort of think that we're saying, do we need to address this now? We do, but we shouldn't make immediate reactions to the detriment of students. So the universities are out there saying this technology is completely banned. How is that going to be enforced? Are they going to be withdrawing lots of students because of it? What are the dangers of a miscarriage of justice if they make the wrong decision? All these things are dangerous. So I think it's appropriate this year to have conversations with students and to have our plans and processes in place, to get the staff training in place. But we should really be thinking going ahead, what are we going to do in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and how are we going to make sure students are using technology they will use in their jobs? Because we've just talked about Copilot. We've just talked about that right now it could be summarizing our meeting. Right now it could be preparing for people who are arriving late for details of the discussion they've missed. People will be using this technology. This will be standard practice. Microsoft is already all over our commercial world, and it will be even more so. It's got the right use of OpenAI technologies and GPT technologies there. So we have to be preparing students and making sure they understand how to use this technology, assessing those skills.
That's great. And I think we're just running out of time. It's been a really interesting conversation. So one final question to reflect upon. We've been talking about AI as a productivity tool and as a game changer in terms of how the sector is going to work. But one of the things we haven't touched upon is the use of AI, or not in any detail, AI as for personalized learning, as a kind of support for you as a learning journey, as a tutor on your side. Do you see a role for that? Do you think that's going to be something that in the future we would embrace? Mairead.
Okay, I'll try and make this quick. So first of all, I just want to make the point that personalized learning is not new and it's not specific to EdTech. There's a fabulous book that was published in 2021 by Audrey Waters called Teaching Machines. It's the history of personalized learning. And she makes a really good point on the fact that good teachers have been personalized learning forever. So that's the first thing. I just want to say that as a teaching and learning person, good teaching practices have always included personalization. The difficulty, I think, in higher ed now is that personalization is what adds to workload. And that's what makes workload unsustainable, right? So we do need to find a solution. I do think that AI tools will help with the aspects that are slightly more mundane, repetitive, that you can edit. So yeah, for example, generating draft feedback, why not? I have no problem with that. Generating draft course outlines on some kind of generic topics. Sure, why not? Use it as a drafter, as a brainstormer to really an efficiency tool in the same way that we're seeing it in outside of education in industry. I see no problem with that. I also think AI can help and already does help with adaptive learning. That has been in LMSs for years. Again, it's not new, it will get better. But I mean, we've had AI in our LMSs as well for years. It's learning analytics, it's data analytics. It's just that I'm not sure how many instructors use it and look at it, but I think now is again the time for everyone, no matter whether you're a computer scientist or not, to get in there and learn about the AI that is in your learning management system, utilize it, leverage it, figure out what you want to do with it yourself, and be the curator as well as the content creator, because I think that's I think it was Thomas who made a reference to this, but my overall impression of what's been happening for the last, 10, 20 years is that the role of the lecturer is changing. And that whether we like it or not, we are to some degree data analysts, mediators, curators, to a certain degree. We're still discipline specialists as well, but we have to be able to deal with the technology from that standpoint. So sorry, again, very long-winded, but yes, we already have, but we will do it differently and hopefully better.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, just on personalized learning, I think it's great tools if we have them available, also for individual students to use. I think there is a big problem about, social injustice and accessibility in that case, as we've already, I think Thomas said this before, like we can see those things coming up behind paywalls now, and there will be many, many different subscription models, whatever they are, at different cost tags. And so that means some students who can afford having an additional tool that they can use will be probably advantaged over those who cannot. And that is a major concern. If we rely too much on people having access to it, then we of course are very quickly disadvantaging students from certain backgrounds. I think I have no good answer to that. I find that a real big concern and probably one of the biggest, because we see that these tools, while they are partially open right now, are being really, really interesting, and people get hooked into it and rely on them. And all of a sudden, when they are putting behind high paywalls, we have a real trouble there.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of personalized learning from that perspective, like students using it themselves as such. Also, I think as a tool to get inspiration, as I think Marie said, right, to get as a drafting tool, I've been using many different language models over the years to help with grant funding applications, right? I just kind of put a few things in there and let them flesh out and say, oh yeah, that's a good way to say it. This is a good way to say it, as long as it conveys my ideas. I think that's really good. And what we already see in terms of personalized, learning and accessibility with the tools we have, with automated captions as we have here, transcripts, etc. There's all AI tools that have proven really, really useful for what we do, right? Live caption and all this bit. So that can really help. I think my main concern is limited access, or access to only some, let's say. That is a major concern. I wonder what the other people are thinking about this, how we can get around that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Oh.
We have 2 minutes till the next session, so I do have to. We could have carried. Typically in these panel sessions, we just really get into it, and then we have to draw it to line. But thank you all. It's been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for all of your insights. I hope the people who are watching today and had made comments, hopefully, I reflected some of your views that you pointed in the questions that I asked. Apologies if I missed anything. But thank you all. I'd just like to say to all of your time and the devotion today and your thoughts. I mean, really useful. And just to say that the next session starts in 2 minutes, taking part in Futurepedia, what matters in AI-empowered and AI-disrupted learning. So I suspect the conversation should, for those who want to, should move over there. Otherwise, at 2:50, we have our digital tools for feedback, liberating or constraining. So please join us in one of those sessions and continue this discussion. But in the meantime, can I join me, please, in thanking and Mark, Thomas, and Marie, and please share your appreciation through the React icons. Thank you all.